Hi, good evening. Um, my, my name is Venkatraman, and I am the chief running evangelist of YouTooCanRun. And we are everything in running. We are a one-stop shop in running, and we do many things around running. We promote running all over the country. And one of the initiatives that we have taken up to promote running is Heartbeat Run, which basically is not an on-ground event because there cannot be any on-ground events now, but is a virtual initiative to bring a lot of attention into heart disease and running. And there are two aspects to it. One is heart disease is preventive, and it helps prevent heart. Running is preventive and it helps prevent heart disease. And the other thing is that many people are afraid that if you run, you'll get a heart attack and die. Which so there's a fear factor and there is the feel good factor about running and heart disease. There are two extremes, and we felt that we should dispel a lot of the information that goes around. People just talk loosely. There's no scientific basis. So we do this web series on the last Tuesday of every month because the last Tuesday of September is the World Heart Day, and we thought that we should celebrate that to kind of do it in conjunction with World Heart Day. And we have got Reliance Hospital as our medical partners in this initiative. And we have today on board two eminent doctors. Please welcome Lendi and Chris. Okay, so Lendi is a master's in sports science. She is also in NCSA certified strength coach training, and she's the head of sports science at Reliance. Sir H.N. Reliance Hospital and Foundation and Hospital. Okay, I got it correct. Okay, and she's there. Welcome to the panel, Andy.
Thank you so much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Venka.
We also have Chris. Chris has been with us. Both of them have appeared on this show quite a few times, and Chris is also a MPhil in sports science. Both are from South Africa. Both are from the stable of comrades. Most of us know South Africa because of comrades. Most of the runners, many who are geeky, may have read about Tim Noakes and his lore of running, and then the sequel, that is the Waterlog book. So that is the kind of ecosystem from which they both of them come. And Chris is a consultant in sports medicine. He is also an SCSA certified. It's a very long list, and the idea is not to bore you with their academic and their professional qualifications. But both of them are here in Bombay, and they are available at Sir H. Reliance. Should you need any, I know of many runners who have gone them. They've been consulting. Many of my friends have been consulting and have reported very, very good results. And if you have any injuries or any issues, I think they are the people to go to. Welcome to the panel, Lendi and Chris.
Thanks for
Thank
having us, Venkat.
Thank you. So today, let's dive into the topic, and you know what is overtraining. I mean, while we encourage many people to run, and the earlier parts of this series have been about how to start running and all that, we also know that there are many who are overtraining. They get too much into it, and it's like medicine. Overdosage is also as harmful as inadequate dosage. So the appropriate dosage is correct. So what exactly is overtraining? How do you define it? Ladies first. Lady, you take it first.
so I think it's really important when we're talking about overtraining to also discuss overreaching, which is a concept used to actually increase your performance. We all know overtraining decreases your performance, but short bursts of overreaching actually really increases your performance. So if we look at overreaching, what that means is it means the increased training leading to a temporary performance decrement. Okay, so temporarily your performance will decrease, but sometimes if you plan it in such a way, it can actually lead to performance increments. All right. And then if we look at overtraining, it is kind of an extreme form of overreaching where you're training too much, and then it leads to negative impact on your performance. So basically, you're looking at feeling muscle soreness, being more tired than usual, lowered resting heart rate. Increased resting heart rate. There's lots of things which we'll get into, I think, later on. But the whole difference between overreaching and overtraining is that the time for recovery is a lot longer if you're looking at overtraining versus overreaching. So overtraining, it would take months to recover, whereas overreaching might be a few days to weeks. So, Chris, add whatever you want to add.
No, I think that's a pretty good summary. I think it's important when you're talking about the negative aspects, things like overtraining. The whole purpose of what we're doing with training is we are trying to push your body beyond what it's comfortable. That's the only way you actually get stronger, get better, get fitter, get whatever you're trying to achieve. So you have to push beyond what's currently your normal capacity. So it's not to suggest that overtraining is taking yourself into an uncomfortable place. You need to do that to get stronger and fitter, or to have some kind of physiological adaptation to the load that you've put into the system. But if that is progressively more than you can take, or I suppose chronically more than you can take, and you don't appreciate the fact that your body needs time to recover, to adapt to that stress, then you're going to get long-term into this sort of overtraining picture. And that's sort of what Leandi was getting into, where your physiological system is behaving exactly the opposite to what you're looking for. So you're actually not getting the positive physiological responses to training. You start to get, then going in the opposite direction, like your resting heart rate increasing, etc.
Okay. So, having looked at overtraining, how do you know that somebody is overtraining? How do you say, hey, guy, lay off, you're overtraining, you are doing too much? Is there kind of, what are the benchmarks? Are there any symptoms, physiological, psychological?
I guess there's lots, and it's different for different people. It's different for different sports as well. So you're looking at things like fatigue, depression, things like slowed heart rate, sometimes increased heart rate, loss of motivation, irritability, not sleeping enough, also restlessness, agitation, and then also it can go into so lack of mental concentration, heavy sore muscles, you're not recovering properly. So these are just a few that you can look at, but obviously it will be different for different people. And I think the easiest way is to probably know yourself and know that, okay, this having muscle soreness for this long a period is not normal for my body, so something must be wrong. So just paying attention to your own body, and just kind of being aware of things that weren't there before is really important.
Chris,
Yeah,
how does somebody know that is overtraining?
I think it's probably important to qualify as well here that Leandi and I tend to see a lot of really, really high level athletes, and when you are talking about let's say an Olympic level athlete, these people are often doing double sessions a day, 6 days a week, which is not normal for your average person. It's not normal for the average person running up and down Marine Drive. So for somebody, your average runner, let's say in Mumbai, to get into actual, the diagnosis or clinical overtraining syndrome, I would feel is probably very rare. These kind of things happen when people are really, really training at high volumes with very little recovery, and probably in quite strenuous environments. That's not to say that it can't happen, of course, because it just takes the right individual with, maybe an addictive mindset, or somebody that's really just crazy driven, which, let's be honest, we know a lot of those, and certainly a lot of runners like that. So it can certainly happen, but it would be relatively rare. I think for your average person, instead of looking at, the things like the psychological symptoms starting to creep in, probably more towards the end of what Leandi said there, like you're really battling to recover. That would be a very easy, simple thing for your average person to say, God, I can't remember the last time I felt fresh when I started to run. That's not a good thing. And then obviously things like injuries. People start to tend to pick up injuries with these as well. And these are like the glaring signs. You know, these are, you don't have to go to a professional to get diagnosed for these things. You can pick these things up. Obviously, wearable technology is huge now as well. Just about every watch, or people are wearing Aura rings or whatever it is that you use to monitor your physiological status. Your heart rate is a really, really easy one. So, if most runners they do have an idea what their resting heart rate is. And if you are somebody who sleeps with a wearable, and you check in the morning what your resting heart rate is in the morning, and it's elevated for a couple of days in a row, because it is normal if you're fatigued after heavy training bout, you don't necessarily have overtraining syndrome, but you may well wake up and not be very well recovered, and your heart rate is abnormally high. Not very high, but maybe 7 or 10 beats higher than it normally is. That sort of should get the alarm bells ringing and think, well, I'm not very fresh. I haven't really recovered from the last things I've done. Let me back off for a day or two and then start again. And that's generally going to be okay. But if you ignore those signs, that's when we start getting into the longer term stuff that Leandi was mentioning there, where people start to have psychological impacts, depression, things like that.
Okay. So elevated resting heart rate. That seems to be something that one can quickly monitor. It's very actionable.
Exactly. I'd say that's a very easy place to start. Yeah.
Very easy place to start. Yeah. But what about for example, injuries?
Yeah.
And it's likely that injuries can happen because of various reasons. I mean, overtraining may not be. How do you know whether that injury is because of overtraining, or it's just degeneration of the body or repetitive use beyond a certain time? How do you classify an injury into an overtraining injury?
Look, I think the short answer is you probably can't straight off the bat, and I wouldn't expect any your average athlete to be able to do that themselves. But really, a chronic injury is an overtraining injury. You're effectively overloading the tissues chronically enough. You're not allowing enough time for recovery, and so the tissue is starting to shout at you, for want of a better term. It's starting to tell you that it's not happy. That would be sort of the telltale signs, how it comes on. Obviously, if a guy's running and he twists his ankle, he may be doing really abnormally high loads, but that specific injury is not as a result of overtraining. It's as a result of an acute loading event. So that would be an acute injury versus a chronic overtraining injury. I think I've answered that. Was there another part of that I forgot about?
No, I think that's pretty spot on.
Okay. Is there a difference between the genders in terms of overtraining? Do men overtrain more, or do men get more injuries if they overtrain? How does it manifest in the two genders? Is there any different ways in which they manifest?
No. So you wouldn't have a gender or sex-based difference on who gets injured more by overtraining. Women do tend to get more injured running. That's just statistically based. And there are a number of theories around that, from biomechanical factors, the Q angle, so the angle at the knees, hormonal factors, obviously, those kind of things. But from a purely overtraining point of view, no, I don't think that you can segregate, who's more susceptible to injury from overtraining or in the overtraining sort of area.
Leandi, anything to comment? Is there a gender difference in overtraining?
No, I don't think so. I think probably what I've kind of seen is that, like Chris said also, is that there are probably different areas where women get injured more often. So maybe, I don't know, I've seen more knees, but that have been injured in runners specifically. But yeah, that's just what I've seen. I'm not sure if Chris has seen anything else, but yeah, that's kind of what I've seen: more knee injuries, lower back injuries, specifically to women. And men would have more shin splints things like that. I'm not sure if it's really correlated to their gender, but that's kind of my experience.
Maybe, sorry, something to add there is there's a term or I suppose a syndrome, Red S, which is a relative energy deficiency syndrome, which tends to occur when this all became a popular term and a popular sort of area of thought a couple of years ago. It was very much directed towards women, because there was, prior to this, the precursor to Red S was something called the female athlete triad, and effectively it was a combination of hormonal factors, potentially disordered eating, and then bone mineral density as well. So that was sort of a traditional thing in sports medicine and injury thought, and that graduated to Red S, this relative energy deficiency syndrome, and also branched out to include men as well, because obviously that's completely and utterly sexist to just assume that women are the only people with eating disorders. That's quite an old school sort of way of thinking. So we're recognizing that, yes, while it might happen more frequently in women or in the female population, it's certainly, men are not exempt from it. So it would be things like aggressive dieting, really pushing the boundaries on the diet front, trying to keep your calories low for whatever your goal is. So there's an energy deficiency there. And then obviously if you do have the female population, and then you start going to things like, amenorrhea and menstrual cycles and those kind of things, there's a fair amount of interaction there that's important. And then obviously females do tend to have lower bone mineral density the older they get. So they tend to be more osteoporotic than men do as well. But that's, again, going back to the minerals and that. So the hormones, rather. So there's a fair interaction there. So from that point of view, yes, women are possibly more susceptible in that environment. But I don't think that, again, I'll go back to saying, I don't think that you can strictly say, you can draw a line, men, women, and women are more susceptible, standard overtraining. I don't think so.
Randy, do you want to add anything? Difference between the genders. There is this aspect of hormonal cycle being disturbed, the menstrual cycle being disturbed. So that, I believe, is some way in which it manifests in the female gender as opposed to the male gender.
Yeah, I guess so. But I think in general, we can't generalize like that. I think a body is a body, and you have to treat it that way. And it's always important to take care of your food. Get blood tests done once a year, make sure all your hormones are good, and then just to make sure that you're eating properly, you're eating what you're supposed to be eating, you're getting in all your minerals. And also then your strength training, you're taking care of your body, you're loading your bones essentially, and making sure that everything is in order. And you don't restrict yourself too much food-wise, which is probably where a lot of people then struggle, and it might lead to overtraining or injuries as well.
Okay, so we got some questions. Yeah, we'll take the questions later. I also have a lot of questions, but let us go through the flow of the event, and then of course we'll take more questions. Overtraining can, the term overtraining can be different for different people. For somebody who's not even running, walking for 1 hour in a shopping mall could be overtraining, correct? And for somebody who's like running, say, 50 kilometers a week, 80 could be overtraining. And for somebody who's doing 150 could be overtraining. For somebody who's running every day of the week, 2 times a day could be overtraining. I met today somebody who's got injuries, put out about 20 kgs because of the lockdown and not being able to run, cut down 12, still is 8 plus from his ideal performance weight. But now from this week, he's going to start doing 3 times a week a day training. So 2 times he's going to run, once he's going to cycle. He's a very serious athlete. So where does one draw the line? There is something about trying to say how many number of days you should run, and I don't believe in that, because that advice, one advice doesn't fit all. And I mean, what is the adaptation level, and how do you monitor that the adaptation is logical and within bounds, as opposed to being too much and then resulting in overtraining? How do you do the training load and see that the person is not overtraining?
I think probably here it's really important to make sure that you take your RPEs after each session. Like I said last time in our talk, so RPE is rating of perceived exertion, basically 1 to 10, and you kind of rate how difficult your workout was for you. You can use that together with the duration of what you're running, and you can multiply them by each other and get a training load. Then what you can do with that is you can make sure that the next week that you train, you increase it by 10%. Okay, so research kind of suggests that this is kind of an easy way to do it. There are multiple other ways and better ways to do it, but doing this, increasing 10% each week, just keeps you at the level where you won't overtrain yourself. So this is just an easy way to kind of increase your load gradually, right? I think what's also really important is you have to monitor how much you're training and you have to gradually increase it. But a deload is also really important. You guys call it taper, like for example, before a competition, before say the Mumbai Marathon, you're going to run less in that week before or in 2 weeks before, so that your body can prepare for running the Mumbai Marathon, right? So this is also important in training, right? For your body to recover for the new training block. So depending on what let's say you have a 4-week training block, I usually like to say in that 4th week, you drop your training load, your total load of the week, by say 40%, 40 to 60%, and then your body's recovered to start then on a new training block at a higher, let's say more distance, you're able to start then because your body has recovered. So I think a lot of the people I speak to, they don't deload at all. They just keep running, and that accumulative load at the end will lead to an increased risk for injury. So this is just the easy way how I do it and how I explain it. But there's obviously multiple other ways, which I think Chris will tell you guys about. But this is kind of, I feel like it's easy to remember.
Just chuck me under the bus there. I lost. No, I don't have much to add to that, to be honest. I think it's sensible. Again, if you're dealing with, say Olympic level athletes, there's obviously a lot more nuance and probably art into the way that you coach and train and things, and a lot of it comes down to feedback from the athlete to the coach, from the athlete to the medical staff. How they're feeling. Are they feeling like they can push harder? Cool, let's try push harder. I mean, you wouldn't go crazy and be nonsensical in how hard you push, but keeping a strict 10% is obviously not how people win gold medals. But for your average Joe, most people who train, it's pretty sensible advice. In research, actually has gone up as high as 22% and shown that you won't get injured running. As high as 22% increases. Obviously, that's not over a 3-year period. I think that was over a 12-week period. They compared different percentages of increase, but I suppose it's just a good example to show you that some people can train harder and some people maybe need to do a little bit less. The whole 10% thing, I think, was basically just like a concept that somebody cooked up. It wasn't based on evidence at all. But it's stuck. Obviously, it's nice and neat, and we've been doing it forever. And I mean, it's relatively good advice, and the evidence certainly hasn't shown that it's a bad idea. So yeah, we keep doing it. I think you can probably afford to go a little bit harder than that, within reason. But again, listen to the symptoms, monitor your recovery. So Leandi's talking about your RPEs. You can't constantly be adding 10% of load for five
forever.
Yeah, exactly. You can't do it, right? So every now and then you have to back off. I think in one of the earlier questions, Leandi was discussing the training principle and the concept of training, where you overload the system goes up, and then there's a natural decrease in performance. So that at the bottom of that performance curve, let me try and get in the picture here. At the bottom of that performance curve, you're actually lower than when you started. But by doing that, by stressing your body out beyond where it was comfortable, you end up coming back higher than where you were, your baseline. So you sort of, there's super compensation. So then when you're feeling good and you're recovered and you add the same thing again, you can see that curve is just going to keep going up and up and up and up. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of a wave, like steps basically. And that's the concept, but you can't obviously do that constantly. You can't just keep going up and up and up and up and up. And that's also where Leandi's come in and said, right, her rule of thumb is every 4th week. Some people might think differently. They might say 5 weeks, 6 weeks, depending on the sport, depending on the phase of competition, the phase of the periodization or whatever. But I think that's pretty good advice as far as I'm concerned, and that's also what I tell people. Like, don't get carried away. I would say anything between 10-15%. Monitor your symptoms. Make sure you feel fresh. If you don't feel fresh, back off. And then, sorry, just one last thing. While you were speaking, Venkat, your examples were all of acute loads, acute spikes in load. So technically speaking, we wouldn't call that overtraining. We would call that training. So we need to also qualify that, like training is pushing yourself hard is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's required. So what you're talking about is a guy coming back and doing 3 times a week, whatever. That's just training. Overtraining is when he doesn't allow the time to recover and he keeps on pushing. That's technically overtraining. So I think maybe the definition of overtraining needs to be sort of looked at as well in the way people use it. Your average person saying, oh, I'm overtraining. You're not overtraining. You're spiking your load, which is when people get injured. So instead of doing your nice sort of thing like that, you end up going straight up, in a J curve. And that's when sort of all the walls come crumbling down.
Very good point. So would one definition be that overtraining is not enough recovery?
Yeah, I'd say that's a very good definition. Yeah.
So it's like black is absence of white, or white is absence of black, whatever. So there's that kind of a situation that overtraining is lack of recovery. Okay.
Yeah, and so, probably in
recovery.
And a long term. So sort of a relatively long term. It wouldn't be 1 week of training while you're fatigued. It would be a longer period of time, probably weeks to months, of training in its fatigued state with a performance decrease. Would probably be I don't know. I mean, somebody might get on the line there and tell me that I'm completely full of nonsense. But I would say, that definition probably wouldn't hold water at a scientific conference. But I think for your average person, if that was your understanding, then I think you'd be on target.
So having kind of put a nail there, overtraining is lack of recovery. Let's get to some ways in which it can manifest, and then we'll come into the periodization part of this, which is very important part of getting recovery. So physiologically, one is the heart rate, right? Your elevated heart rate over a period of time can be a very good indicator. So I tell my athletes, wear a heart rate monitor, go to sleep, and you have this optical HR, which is decent enough, and keep monitoring. I tell them to take a 1 week break, and at the end of 1 week, when they're completely recovered from training, monitor their resting heart rate at the best recovered there. So that's their baseline recovery heart rate, resting heart rate, and then look at whether it's creeping up slowly. So that's one way in which I tell my athletes to monitor their overtraining. Are there any other physiological symptoms? I know of some people who kind of run their hands, palpitate under the skin, look at the muscle fiber tissue, and find out if they have been overtraining, and tell them not to run if they don't feel good. I mean, what are the other ways? I mean, there are some people who go for creatine levels to see if they are overtraining. What are the other ways in which one could determine besides the resting heart rate?
I guess there are a lot of physiological changes that happen in the body, but I think probably it's not not everyone has access to a hospital like we do, who
Exactly.
can get tests done regularly. So I think probably using resting heart rate is a nice and easy way. And then also I think using a tool such as a wellness questionnaire. So we use a pretty simple one, which basically just asks you how you're feeling, how recovered do you feel, how many hours of sleep did you get, how was your quality of sleep, do you feel ready for training? And it's basically a simple questionnaire out of 5, where the athletes can just score themselves, and that gives me a good idea of how the athlete is feeling. Yes, it's not heart rate, things like that. It's very dependent on the athlete, but it's just a good way over time to track. If I see tomorrow morning an athlete comes in and they've scored themselves, they usually score about 4 or 5 for readiness for training, and they're scoring low, they're scoring 2 or 1, then I know, okay, something must be wrong. And then I check their sleep, see how much they've slept. Maybe it's the sleep, they just didn't sleep enough. So that's kind of an easy way that you can monitor yourself also, or monitor any athletes that you're working with. Just a nice wellness questionnaire before you start your session, and then tracking that over time to kind of see how it changes over time. Again, there's a lot of physiological things that happen in the body, but yeah, I think this is one way to easily show, okay, you're not recovered. Maybe it's just overreaching. You had a hard session yesterday, but if it happens continually and you're scoring low, then I would say, okay, I would take a deeper look into it and maybe then pull my training back for that day.
Good. Chris, do you want to add something?
Yeah, no, I think that's bang on target. The subjective reporting has been validated through loads of research. The value of somebody telling you how they feel, like doing an RPE or doing a wellness questionnaire, is just as valuable in the general population as heart rate monitoring and all those other things. And to be honest, if somebody's going to the extent of getting a blood test to see if they're overtraining, there's either something horribly wrong with them if they've got to that point, or they're overtraining like way too much. They're in the deep end. If they're thinking that they need a blood test to tell what's wrong with them, certainly that's not a practical way to find out if you're overtraining. That's a bit of a crazy idea, to be honest.
Sure. We talked about, Lindy talked about mental wellness and feeling exhausted, feeling tired, not feeling like this. I mean, how do you differentiate between lethargy, laziness, kick your butt, get out and go and run kind of laziness, feeling depression, because depression is the common cold of mental illness today. And in the stress times that we are in, COVID is so stressful for so many people in so many ways, career, family, work, everything. That kind of depression and really overtraining. I mean, is there any way to say, yes, this is overtraining depression versus this is normal depression versus this is just laziness?
I think
I mean, I know it's a difficult question, but I'm just throwing it up there.
it's a very good question. I think it's really important that we realize that overtraining is not just about training. Overtraining can be impacted by your lifestyle, lack of sleep. It can be impacted by stressors around you. So in your work environment, in your home environment. So it's not just, you can actually be overtrained because of these other stress factors, not even just your training. So that's something to just consider when we're talking about overtraining. I do think that if if you're chronically feeling a certain way, I mean, we all are lazy some days. So,
Yes.
and the best cure for that is going for a run. But I think if it's a chronic feeling where you're feeling down, you're feeling things are too much, I think it's always just best to reach out to a psychologist. We have brilliant psychologists at the hospital. We have a sports psychologist as well. and then reach out to them, even if you think that it's overtraining, but you've kind of been feeling like this for a while. Make sure that you reach out to someone who can help you with that. It's really just the best thing to do. And then it's not just working on that, but psychologists work on all different aspects, and can at the end of the day make you a better athlete, so, and a better human as well. So I think it's just really important to mention that. And I guess it is hard to kind of notice these things, but I think chronically, if it's there, it's best just to seek help.
Okay. Chris, do you want to add something to the mental aspect of overtraining?
No, I agree with Leandi again, but I think maybe just, for in practical terms, if that person is waking up and they're trying to, it's obviously a very basic example, but if you're trying to work out, if you're just lazy or if you're overtrained, then maybe try and connect the dots elsewhere. If you do have access to your heart rate. If your heart rate's fine and you just don't want to go for a run, you're probably lazy. But there are a couple of other things, you could sort of try and connect those dots and look at one or two other factors. Maybe look at how much you've been training. If you haven't been training particularly excessively and you wake up and you're feeling just a bit pumped, maybe you are just lazy. But yeah, I think it's not. It's also another thing is it's not only going to affect you in the morning. You're not just going to wake up and feel rubbish in the morning, and then by lunchtime you feel like, oh man, I really should have gone for that run. I feel great. That's probably just laziness. Overtraining, if you're in an overtrained state, that will hold on, constantly. It's not just going to be when you wake up.
Good. So let's move from how it manifests itself. We looked at what is overtraining, some classic definitions, how it manifests and how to identify physiological, mental. Let's get into recovery. Let's say you're overtrained and it is. And let's take in recovery, again, recovery is a very, very broad topic, but let's take periodization or, rest. So let's take the smallest unit of time. How is there a difference in individual athletes in terms of recovery time? I've read somewhere that some take 24 hours, some take 48-hour cycle of recovery, 24 hours of cycle of recovery. DOMS comes in 12 hours, 16 hours, 24 hours. So how does one know that one had a very hard training yesterday? Let's say one did running and hit and everything, and the whole body is sore. How is one sure that one is in a 24-hour cycle of recovery, 48-hour cycle, 72-hour cycle of recovery? How much time should you give yourself before the next load session?
I think it's probably definitely dependent on the athlete itself. Like Chris mentioned earlier, we see athletes who train sometimes 3 times a day. So that's again on the extreme end. But I think it's definitely individual. We all adapt to training differently, and that's why recovery will be longer for some people than for other people. It also depends on your fitness levels. If you're just starting after the lockdown now, going for a run, you will be sore for a few days for sure. So it's based on your level of fitness, I think, very much. And I think it's just about just learning and knowing your body, and then also just taking care of your nutrition and your sleep. These are the 2 easiest recovery methods that you can use. Just making sure that you're eating properly, healthy, nutritious food, as well as sleeping for 7 hours, 7 to 9 hours at night. And then usually what we suggest for people, if you want to do 2 sessions a day, which I don't think anyone on here wants to do, but they usually suggest that it should be 6 hours in between the 2 sessions. So that's kind of a nice guideline if you want to start training twice a day. Other than that, the usual standard of 24 hours is usually good enough, making sure that you're eating properly and you're sleeping properly. And then, of course, there's a variety of different recovery tools. yeah, this is kind of what I've seen.
Okay. Chris, do you want to add something?
Yeah, it's probably worth also mentioning the different energy systems you're using. Now, obviously, most people are, if they run, as most of your volume is done in sort of the LSD space, endurance, maybe zone 2 type of training. But the more, I suppose, goal-oriented you get, you probably will start doing more sprint work. You might start doing more power work, maybe in the gym, trying to get more explosive, using the bigger muscles, maybe doing some compound lifts in gym, things like that. And that then also changes the dynamic from a recovery point of view. 100% echo what Leandi says about it. Everyone's an individual. So as humans, we like to be very reductionist in our approach. We want, we just want a quick fix. Like, okay, cool. Well, what works? Nothing is that easy, unfortunately. Everything is individual because we're all different. But if you have a decently sort of, or a pretty good chronic level of training, you should have a relatively good understanding of how long these sort of recovery things take you. And as Leandi said, maybe in your off season or when you've been on a holiday and not done a lot, that first couple of weeks back is going to be a little bit trickier from a recovery point of view. When you're in the depths of your sort of 42 or ultra training, you probably are going to recover relatively quickly. And then it becomes more about listening to the symptoms for any adverse stuff that you should be in a decent pattern to know. But if you are doing a lot of explosive work, you can't be doing explosive work 24 hours apart. Those systems will take a little bit longer. If you're doing endurance stuff, yeah, 24 hours not bad, but how many 24-hour on top of each other can you do? That's also something you need to work out. So I think definitely needs to be individualized and appreciated that these things are not, there's no cookie cutter response really, there's no recipe book. If there was, we wouldn't have jobs. Yeah.
Okay. So we came to this, recovery between sessions period cycle. There is, of course, the mesocycle, macrocycle. Let's jump to the other end of the cycle. In a year, how much of downtime, recovery time do you think is suitable? Not just from a physiological point of view, but also from a mental state. You know, not being worried about performance all the time, just chilling, shooting the breeze, to use an American term. What do you recommend?
Well, I would say it's definitely also individual and depends on the season and how many competitions you're taking part in, how long the competition season is. So yeah, I think it's definitely individual, but I think Chris will probably agree with me, but in professional sports, there's no off season, and that makes our jobs really hard. But I think if you're lucky enough to have that, then taking maybe 2 weeks up to 4 weeks, if that's your goal and you have that much time to take off before your next competition, then that's kind of good. I know that there's marathons across the year, so it's really just important to take those competitions that you want to take part in and make sure that your off season is not going to disturb your overall periodization plan. And then just it'll depend, I guess, on the individual and how much time they actually have off and what their plan is for the year.
Chris, do you want to add something about taking an annual vacation from trading?
Yeah, again, very individual. I'm sorry to be, banging out the same line over and over, but that's the reality here is that, if you look at where different people come from, let's say, and the way people train, you can't tell me that your average Kenyan runner is taking a month off a year. He's not. Your average East African distance runner, he's definitely not. He's running a hell of a lot more than most people we know on a weekly basis, his mileage is through the roof compared to what we would expect, and he doesn't take much break. What is important is that over the years, and I suppose you mentioned Tim Noakes and the law of running earlier, and things like, the original sort of Jack Daniels advice and stuff is, not to try and race too frequently. So to keep running and just to, there's nothing wrong with constant training, but to understand what you're trying to achieve. So what you do see at the elite level is you don't see guys trying to win 3 big races a year. That doesn't happen. It's max 2, and that's sort of historic, has been going on forever. Interestingly, you also mentioned the comrades and where we're from. Caroline Wassman a couple of years ago won both the comrades and the oceans in the same year, which was like completely unheard of. And in fact, it wasn't even part of the plan. So she was concentrating on oceans that year. Comrades was a training run. At that level, if it can be a training run, but it was a training run, and I think, I don't know at what point in the race it was, but she effectively said to her coach, she was like, he said, "How are you feeling?" And she's like, "Oh, I feel fantastic." And he was like, "Seriously?" She's like, "Yeah, I feel really good." And he was like, "Well, go for it then." So she put her foot down, but she wasn't planning on winning the comrades. She wasn't planning on trying to race the comrades. She got to like 50, 60 Ks and she was feeling great, and she was like, killing everyone. She's like, "Okay, cool, let's just give this a crack." And then also did the oceans in the same year. So, 100% individual chronic training history is hugely important. I don't know. I wouldn't say that you have to advocate for time away. You did mention something important there where I think you take the stress out of running. So I wouldn't necessarily say physically you have to step away from running, but you certainly shouldn't be like, intently focusing on training hard all year.
Correct. This point that I would like to even stress is that we find too many runners wanting personal best in every event they run. And I say that can happen if you're not even trained, because if you've been a walker and if you toddle along, you'll get a personal best. I mean, at that level, you'll get a personal best in the next couple of runs that you run. But at a certain level, you'll start plateauing, and then it's never going to happen. And that is foolishness. And yes, athletes don't train for more than 2 events in a year in terms of overtraining. But we have people who are running full marathons every week within their house, between their bedroom and the living room, and I don't even know how they do that. But anyway, for each one, it's very individual, Chris. I'm trying to repeat you. It's individual to every athlete what they want to do. Okay, so before we take some questions, and we have some very interesting questions, I just want to touch upon one point. We will not go into all the aspects of recovery, but heat and cold are like they have both their camps. Okay, so which camp do you belong in? I mean, you got an injury, you got a sore knee, you got a sore calf muscle, you got a sore ankle, you got a sore whatever. Okay, so heat or ice?
Chris, this is yours.
Okay, so this is incidentally another area where research is currently sort of very much on the fence. Probably for, I don't know, a good 15 years, people were heavily in the cold therapy, cryotherapy, icing camp, particularly after exercise. And then in the last maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 years, it started, veering away from routine icing to only icing at certain times. So, for example, well, I suppose explain why. They started to understand from research that icing actually decreased your performance acutely. Sorry, it decreased your adaptation acutely, but it didn't impact the performance. It didn't improve or decrease, but it gave you a better sense of perceived recovery. So everyone in the studies reported that they felt better the next day. They didn't jump any higher, they didn't run any faster, they didn't cycle any further at a better time, but they felt better. So the perceived recovery was deemed to be a psychological benefit. And so they said, okay, well, look, there's clearly no benefit to doing these ice baths, but people feel better. So maybe that is a good thing. physiological benefit. There's no physiological, but there's a mental benefit or psychological benefit. So then everyone started doing it all the time, and then they realized actually that, sorry, I'm going back in circles here. Then they realized that there was no adaptive benefits, and in fact that cooling and potentially slowing down that small inflammatory response after a heavy training session was actually reducing adaptation. So now what we advocate is not routine icing, so certainly not during a training block, but for your athlete who's maybe at the Commonwealth Games, at the Olympic Games, at the FINA World Champs, if they're doing multiple events a day or they're doing back-to-back events day after day, it's quite important for them psychologically to feel fresh. So in that environment, you wouldn't mind them icing, because also they're not going there to adapt. If you're still trying to train at the Olympics, then you've got it all wrong. So if it's all about feeling comfortable. So we don't care if people foam roll, they get a rub, they ice, they generally stand in the corner on their head. If it feels good, doesn't matter. If you feel good, do it. But from a physiological and from a science point of view now, it seems like icing is on the way out, even for acute injuries, because people are, again, talking about how that inflammatory reaction we actually want, because it's the start of the healing process. So maybe we shouldn't be doing it. I'm not convinced yet. I haven't seen enough evidence. I don't think that it's definitely bad. I've certainly seen some evidence that it isn't great, but I don't know. As for heat, I think that's pretty anecdotal. If it makes you feel good, go for it. If it doesn't, don't. And I think maybe the same for ice, actually. Maybe that's the best advice is what do you like to do? But bearing in mind that if you're in a training block, routine icing is not advised. If you're in a competition environment and you're playing a football tournament, let's say, an under 18 football tournament, that's a 2-week tournament, and you're playing back-to-back games, you really do need to feel fresh. So maybe icing is appropriate then. Yeah, I think without answering that, I think that's about as much as I can say.
Leni, do you want to add something to the heat versus cold debate?
No, I think Chris is absolutely right. I think when you speak to people, they will tell you, I feel better with ice, or I feel better with heat. And yeah, I think then use that if that works for you. I think it's very individualized, and it really depends from person to person.
So sorry, let me just actually quickly add, from an injury point of view, we don't want people icing tendons. So that has been shown in research to be detrimental to tendon recovery, particularly in things like a sort of long-standing Achilles or patellar tendinopathy. We don't want ice.
You don't want ice.
No.
Okay. So that's a definite no.
Definite no. Yeah.
Okay. So there is a lot of people who keep these ice packs and put them on their feet and on their ankles and sit down after a run. So actually the advice is contrary to that.
Depending on what it's for. If it's for an Achilles tendon, yes, please tell them to stop doing that.
Okay. No icing after the run. Good. That's one key, certain takeaway. So let's get on to the questions. Bijender is asking if there's a simpler way to calculate if you're overtraining. For example, number of days one runs every week. I think we answered that. Is it possible to categorize it 3 or 4 days running is good enough for amateur runners? Again, Bijender, I think the answer is very difficult to answer. Horses for the courses, you don't know what is good for one, good for the other. Depends upon what part of the cycle you are in terms of your training. Depends upon what your goals are in terms of your training. Whether you still want to keep losing that weight and or not, and how much you're partying. So many factors are involved. Very difficult to answer that in one single. Yeah, Amit, thank you very much. Praveen has a bunch of questions, but he left. Okay. What are the advanced recovery methods to be adopted for faster recovery? What kind of food items speed up recovery? We will have a completely different session on that, because food is a very popular item, and then 1 hour is not enough for food and recovery. And then there's always that question about whether I can drink some alcohol or not. So I'll keep a separate session for that. So there's a question about rate of pursuit exertion, and I think you mainly answered that. I am running 15 kilometers every day whereas I'm advised to run 20 kilometers? This is quite wonderful question, Venkat sir. So I talked about upping the this. I think the rule there would be 10%. I think we answered that as adaptation because of training.
I think what's probably also important to mention there is variation in training. So
Hmm.
one of the things that leads to overtraining is also monotony, which
Okay.
means that you're doing the same kind of sessions every week, the same distances, the same intensity. So I think variation in training is also really, really important to prevent overtraining. So
Hmm.
maybe doing shorter distances, doing tempo runs, doing sprints, things like that will really just help vary your training in a week and
Hmm.
may help in preventing overtraining as well.
Good. There's a question from Kevin Matthias. So he says that can menopause increase the max heart rate during exercise? Is there a correlation between menopause and heart rate?
I'm not sure. I will have
I'm
to
not
find
aware.
out.
I'm not aware of that. I'll do some research and get back to you if you want to take that person's details, and we can get back to them. But
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
not aware.
the you can give me that question and we'll answer it back on the Facebook video feed.
Cool.
Okay.
Sure.
Uh, Dinesh is asking basically, do you mean that we are doing easy runs, then we can continue running? So is aerobic MAF heart rate runs, is that will that lead to overtraining?
I guess,
Anything can lead to overtraining.
yeah, I
Hmm?
guess again, the variation comes in, right? If you're doing easy runs every day, you also won't get better,
Hmm.
right? You want to push your body, you want to overreach a little bit to make sure that you get better, you get faster, you run in less amount of time. So then it's really important to vary your training. Otherwise, just doing the same distance the whole time is not going to be
Hmm.
effective in that. And it might lead
Shilpa,
to overtraining.
Shilpa, my colleague, is asking how much to run after hysterectomy.
I think it's probably best to make sure that you take care of your strength first,
Hmm.
a lot of pelvic strength and stability, and
Hmm.
then gradually starting up again. I think
Hmm.
everything just needs to be gradual, and you have to make sure that you get approval from your
Hmm.
doctor first before starting running,
Hmm.
and just gradually start again, and make sure that you take care of your pelvic strength for sure.
Kegels.
Yeah, things like that. Core, lots
Hmm.
of core training.
Hmm.
Yeah, for
Strengthen
sure.
the pelvic floor muscles, basically.
Yes, yes. But yeah, make sure that you obviously it's a major surgery. Make sure that you speak to your doctor before you take part in any training whatsoever. Speak to your doctor first.
Okay. Uh, Shushil Kumar says, I am a recreational runner and run 100 miles a week, plus minus 10%. I'm 70 plus age. Wow. I am not injured. How do I know whether I'm overdoing
Wow.
it?
You're not. Well done.
Huh?
Yeah.
Don't change a thing. Whatever you're doing,
Yeah,
carry
you
on.
are a role model for me, Shushil.
Yeah, seriously, don't change a thing. Just keep going.
Don't listen to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't listen to us. Yeah, that's right. Sometimes the experts are not good for you. Yeah. Shekhar Kulkarni, good evening, sir, madam. Excellent session and wonderful views. Thank you, Shekhar. How to measure heart rate? Does optical heart rate monitor give accurate measure? If not, what should we rely on?
I
What is an optical heart rate measure?
The one that comes with the light on the wrist
Oh yeah.
instead of the chest strap. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's accurate if you're using a good brand. I think probably depends on the brand. I think they're all pretty good, and they all will give you your resting heart rate. I have not seen one that doesn't give you resting heart rate. So yeah, I think any kind of smartwatch is good, and you can also, I mean, count your beats if you really want to, if you don't have a watch. But yeah, I think that's pretty good.
I have done things like running with a chest strap in one hand and then with a optical in the other, and just try to compare. And I can say that the optical is quite within range. I mean, you cannot say that this is also very accurate, but it's within range. and it's not too far off for most of the practical purposes that we need to seek that data for, and to get into zones and training and all that. I think they're quite accurate. Optical heart rate is not something to sneer at, though the purist might say that it's not as good as a chest strap, but it's still good enough.
As long as you're using the same device, right? If I wear my watch and I'm using my watch to all my runs, then I know, okay, my watch, even if it is off by, say, 5 beats or something, you'll know when it increases over the resting heart rate.
So Amit Yadav says there's a popular concept nowadays of 100 days of running and 100 days of not running, is it? HDNR, okay. Among amateur runners, how much good or bad are both of these? Ideally, what should runners follow? I'm assuming HDOF is 100 days of, I don't know, of not running. Amit, can you just type an explanation to that full form? I don't want to give a wrong answer because I don't know what that means exactly.
I can't.
Unless you guys know it. I mean, Lady and Chris, do you all know what it means?
I can't comment on the taking 100 days off, but I do have quite a few. Yeah, I don't know. So if it is 100 days of running, I've got a couple of patients who've tried this, and it sort of fits in the bracket with these boot camp challenges during that. They were like going mental during COVID. They were like off the charts. Everyone was doing these online sessions where you train for 60 days straight and whatever. Like, and to be honest, that's like the kind of thing you do when you're bored and you have nothing else to do. It's just silly. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense in any way, shape, or form to run for 100 days. I would ask you what the goal is. If the goal is to raise money for charity, cool. Sounds pretty noble. If your goal is to get better at running, there's absolutely no sense in that. If your goal is to try and injure yourself, carry on. It just doesn't make sense. There's no practical sort of way where that would make sense to focus on 100 days for any reason. Like I said, if we look at elite East African runners, those guys probably are running for 100 days straight. But on their sort of recovery days, they're probably doing a fraction of the volume that they would do on the other days. And that to them is effectively like us walking around, you know, like an active recovery walk for us. So in that case, yeah, those guys are running 100 days in a row. But for everyone else, it doesn't really make sense.
I understand that there's this competitive thing that it gets people motivated, which I don't think is a bad thing, but there's definitely a right way to do it. So I think it's nice everyone to get motivated, but yeah, I don't think I agree with Chris. It's not the best idea.
I agree. There has been considerable debate within the running community about whether 100 days of running is desirable or not desirable. And some runners have expressed very strong opinions similar to what you all have expressed now. I myself am of the view that, because especially I train older athletes, that recovery is an equal and important part of training. And recovery is training, you know, in a way. So it's passive training, that is active training. That's what I tell my athletes. You should recover well. Amit has clarified 100 days of not running. We can cross train by other activities, swimming, cycling, walking, etc. But 100 days of not running. So what is your, how does that fit in with the philosophy of 100 days of running?
Again, I would question the reason behind it. So if it has some form of, if there's any kind of reasoning that relates to running or getting fitter at running, no, there's no point in doing that. None whatsoever. Taking 1 or 2 days off to recover or cross training, you know, during your training cycle, yes, that makes perfect sense because you're allowing certain functional movements and certain joints and muscles and loading patterns to relax and rest, relatively rest, before loading them up again. But there's a goal there. There's a training goal. Stepping away from running for 100 days to do 100 days of anything else, again, I think that's probably more just, you know, if that interests you or it entertains you or whatever, go for it. But there's no benefit to running.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Amit, I hope that answered your question. Mahesh, during a run, 80 to 90% of my heart rate is zone 5 high, but no issue during after run. Is it good, bad, okay? So he's obviously running in zone 5. I don't know for how long, but is that, and he says there is no issue either during or after the run, but is that good or bad?
I guess doing this every day would probably not be a good idea. Again, variation in training. You need your easy, long, slow distance runs also, which are lower intensity. That's also important. And then doing a run like this by itself is probably not an issue. But if you're doing it continually, it can add to other problems, I guess.
Honestly, the funny thing is that I think if you look at all the sort of Strava and Garmin data, a huge portion of runners actually run in zones 4 and 5. We all, for the most part, we all, very general, we run too intensely. We run at too high an intensity. People, I mean, if your average person goes out and tries to stay in zone 2, they'll stop running, they'll walk home, they'll say, this is dreadful. I hate this is boring as hell. You don't feel like you're exercising. It's only once you're actually at a decent fitness level that you can tolerate those kind of slow runs. It's very, very hard for your average person to run in zone 2. It's really, really hard. From you honestly, like, you'll have to stop every maybe 100 or 200 meters. Try it. If anyone's listening and isn't, a relatively fit runner, go out and try and run in zone 2. It's not easy to stay in zone 2. So I'd say, was his name Amit? I'd say that that's actually quite a common, I suppose, mistake runners make, and not a mistake from the point of view that it's dangerous or anything. Like Leanne said, you'll get away with it, but it's actually just not great training to run that hard. So you want to sort of try and vary it a little bit. You really do need those, slow, easy runs to work on the cardio side. Although there is tons more research in high intensity stuff coming out now. But I think reality is, if you're looking at doing half marathons and marathons, the bulk of your training needs to be done at those lower zones, if you want to improve and if you want to actually do, as well as you can.
Good. Okay, last question from Kevin. Would appreciate if you can get back on my question, as there is a mixed opinion that hormonal imbalance during menopause affects heart rate. Heart rates tend to be higher. This question is on behalf of my wife. So
Yeah.
thanks, Kevin. We'll definitely try to get your wife's issues resolved, and we'll try to get back on that. Let me also do some research and see if there is anything connecting both of them. But I do know of one research which was done, I think, in one of the London marathons, and they asked all the women finishers whether they had performed better than normal and whether they got a PB, and in which part of the cycle they were, and they that study was about 200 300 women finishers, and they found that there was no correlation between women having performed well on that day, which means they ran a very good time, and which part of the cycle they were. So that study concluded that it doesn't matter which part of the cycle you are. If you're well trained, you will do well, and that menstrual cycle does not impact performance. That was that study, but I'm sure there are many more studies like this.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind just getting that question, just sending it to us, emailing it to us, we can do
Sure,
it.
I'll pick it up and I'll mail it to you.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So last question, Amit. Thank you very much. For 3 years, I have followed 100 days of not running during off season. Cross training continues, though it has given me a lot of time for recovery. Starting the season again from zero becomes challenging. Yes, Amit, it is challenging, and yeah, I mean, we had a long break because of the lockdown, and I just made people walk for 1 hour for the first week. I said just walk for 1 hour and get this, because many people are not even walking. So and yeah, and you need to get back. But if you're cross training well, then you come back faster, because specificity is also an important aspect of training. which you lose because of 100 days of not running.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that kind of sums it up. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Lindy. Thanks a lot, Chris. Are there any last words on overtraining and running before we end this session?
I think just echoing everything that we said, make sure you vary your training, make sure you periodize your year properly, make sure you use something such as RPE just to monitor your load, make sure you increase it by 10% or 10 to 15%, as Chris said. And yeah, also sure that you strength train, right? It's really important also to do strength training. Yeah, that's pretty much it from my side.
Yeah.
Chris, any final words from you?
I think I'd probably just go back to like maybe the one lasting thing is for people to understand that training hard is not overtraining. Overtraining is a dysfunctional state if you continuously ignore signs and symptoms that you aren't recovering properly. That's probably quite an important thing to understand is listen to your body. Your body tells you way before any doctor or coach or anyone else will tell you there's a problem. So just listen to it. We overcomplicate things way too much. Just if your body feels rubbish, back off. If it feels good, you're probably okay to push on. Training needs to be hard by definition. Your body will only change if you give it a really good reason to do so. It's not going to change just because you want to, or you're talking to your mates about it, or the race is coming up. You have to really work hard to get somewhere. So we certainly don't want to scare people off training. Training must be hard, but listen to your body.
Good. So with the final words, we'll say thanks. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Amit. Thanks, Praveen. Thanks, Vijender. Thanks, Kulkarni. Thanks, Shilpa. Thanks, everybody for taking part. Thanks, Kranti, for asking those questions. So thank you very much, and good night to everybody. Train well, but don't overtrain. Thank you.